Anthropic just got its most restricted models back, and the timing could reshape the whole frontier race. Welcome back to Midnight Signal AI. It's July 2nd, 2026.
Today, we've got the export control twist, a new Claude release aimed at agents, Google's next Gemini Flash showing up early, and a startup trying to make chatbots less predictable.
And there's a second thread running through all of it. These companies are no longer just chasing capability, they're fighting over access, control, and who gets to ship first. Let's start with Anthropic, because the biggest headline today is that Claude Fable 5 is back. The US has lifted the export control restriction, and that model is available again.
That's not just a headline about one model coming back. It's Anthropic signaling that access itself is a strategic lever. If a frontier model can move from restricted to broadly available, the company can turn regulatory changes into momentum.
And Anthropic didn't just restore Fable 5, it also rolled out Claude's Sonnet 5, which several outlets framed as a cheaper, more agentic model with performance close to the Opus line.
That's the important part. This isn't just another incremental chat update. It's Anthropic trying to win on the practical layer, autonomous work, coding, and research tasks that companies can actually budget for.
The timing matters too. Tech Radar called it the Battle of the Agents, and the Decoder said Sonnet 5 closes the gap to the Opus series. So Anthropic is basically saying you don't need the top-tier model for every job.
The interesting thing is how fast Anthropic is trying to occupy every rung of the ladder. Restricted model, cheaper agent model, science-focused workbench. That's a full-stack strategy, not a single launch.
Speaking of that science angle, Anthropic also introduced Claude Science yesterday. MIT Tech Review described it as a flagship product for researchers, biotech founders, and pharmaceutical executives.
Right, and the real signal is that Anthropic is not treating science as a side demo. It's positioning Claude Science as a serious product category, which suggests the company wants recurring revenue from places where the output is expensive and the stakes are real.
Switching gears, Google seems to be lining up its own next move. A Gemini Flash successor appeared on LM Arena before launch, and separate reports say Nano Banana 2 Lite and Gemini Omni Flash are aimed at faster, cheaper media creation.
Google's move feels very familiar. Make it faster, make it cheaper, and make it easy for developers to plug in. If those reports hold, Gemini Flash is going straight at the practical market, not the headline market.
Now for the most unusual story of the day. MIT Tech Review says the Australian startup Springboards built Flint, an LLM designed to escape what it calls groupthink, basically making answers more varied and less predictable.
I like this one because it highlights a blind spot in the whole industry. Everyone has spent years optimizing for correctness and safety, but a lot of real-world value comes from divergence, options, alternatives, surprise. The hard part is doing that without just becoming sloppy.
And Springboards is leaning into that tension directly. Pip Bingham's pitch is essentially that models are already biased towards the same obvious answers, so why not train one to explore the rest of the space?
That could matter more than it sounds. If Flint can reliably surface less obvious ideas without collapsing into nonsense, it may find a niche in ideation, travel planning, marketing, and anywhere people want breadth before they want certainty.
One more quick security note before we close. Wired reports a researcher used Anthropic's Claude Opus 4.7 to break into Frontgate, the ticketing site used for festivals from Lollapalooza to Bonnaroo, and issue tickets freely.
That story is the reminder that capability and misuse scale together. As these models get better at taking actions, the security problem stops being theoretical, it becomes operational, and then it becomes expensive.
Before we wrap, there's another market signal worth noting. Benzinga points to Claude growing far faster than ChatGPT, even though OpenAI still dominates users, so the revenue race and the user race may be diverging.
Which is exactly what today feels like across the board. Anthropic is trying to monetize through enterprise access, science, and agents. Google is pushing speed and cheaper media generation. Springboards is trying to sell novelty. And the security story says none of this happens in a vacuum.
That's the day's picture. The frontier models are getting more specialized, the access rules are shifting under them, and the next competitive edge may come from how well a model behaves, not just how smart it is. Before we close things out, a few quick signals from beyond today's headlines. Now let's shift gears to robotics. NVIDIA's long game looks less like selling one product and more like powering an entire machine economy. The story here is that robotics only becomes a mega market when the underlying compute, simulation, and inference layers get cheap enough to scale. That's why the bullish thesis reaches beyond one robot maker and into the whole supply chain.
Right, and that matters because the bottleneck isn't just building a cool humanoid chemo, it's making millions of machines reliable enough for warehouses, factories, and eventually streets. If governments and companies really do lean into that, the value moves to the infrastructure underneath it.
Exactly. Japan's reported push toward a sovereign AI model and 10 million robots is a good reminder that this is also about national strategy, not just venture hype. When labor gets scarce, automation stops being an option and starts becoming policy. The robotics story is getting bigger and a lot more practical. On the medical front, the theme is very clear. Usefulness has to come with restraint. The delirium work is interesting because it doesn't try to replace clinical judgment, it tries to organize it. Physicians help shape the features, and that can catch signals that a generic model would flatten or ignore.
And that's probably the right instinct for healthcare AI. A model can be technically impressive and still fail the bedside test if nobody trusts why it made a call. In medicine, explainability isn't a bonus feature. It's often the difference between adoption and rejection.
Exactly. The radiology and token pruning threads point to the same lesson. Medical data is messy, and the useful signal is often buried in very specific places. If AI can learn to focus without getting noisy, that's a real step toward clinical support that people might actually use. And to end on a lighter note, here's the internet doing what it does best, asking a chatbot to divine Bitcoin's fate. It's a very 2026 move, part market commentary, part fortune-telling, part meme.
Honestly, if the prediction comes with enough confidence, somebody out there will treat it like a trading signal. The rest of us can just enjoy the spectacle. What stands out to me is the split between breadth and control. Anthropic is broadening into science and agents, Google is broadening into media tools, and Springboards is broadening what counts as a good answer. At the same time, the security and policy stories show the industry is being forced to prove it can scale without losing control. That tension is probably the real story to watch next.
That's your signal. See you next time.